Hello, this is Alex Nesbitt from Digital Podcast. In Digital Podcast 40, we're focusing on measuring performance on the social web. This video podcast accompanies a longer posting that we have at digitalpodcast.com/podcast news. So let's get into what we're talking about here today. When we speak about measuring performance on the social web, it comes about when we speak to executives. They tell us once we get how social media works, meaning that they know that they need to be in a lot of different places. They know it's very different from what the traditional web model have been. The question becomes, how do we optimize? What are the measures? What's the management process for making all of this social media work as effectively as possible? And really what we need is a process for social media performance management. At least that's our perspective on this. And we hope you'll join us in this conversation about social media and how we measure performance and how we manage for performance in a world where social media and the social web are really the new environment in which marketing takes place. So when we think about social media performance management, we need to look at first what's different. Social media works very differently than the traditional broadcast or web or what is often called, I think, a Web 1.0 model. But really it's the Web 1.0 model was very much the broadcast model ported onto the web, as that's the frame of reference that we had about how to market effectively. And if we think about just a few of the things that are very different about social media, the first has obviously been the huge growth in user contributions, both of direct content but also of insight in the way of rankings and ratings and links and bookmarks and all kinds of different ways in which the users are interacting with the web to create a much richer environment. But it's a very different kind of environment than we had in the past, much more contribution from the users. We have a model where content now seeks users. I think in Web 1.0, sites were destinations, and if users wanted to find content, that's where they went. Now we have models where content actually moves out from the sites and moves out into the social web, and we see things like downloadable media, embeddable videos, widgets, and the list could go on as to different ways in which content is out there seeking users. But it's a very different phenomenon. It means that there's a much more distributed environment in which we're managing our content and the way in which we interact with users. And it also means that there's probably some different issues as it relates to marketers placing advertising and ways in which we interact with the users. And there is continuous growth in what I'll call the expectations of free. And I really mean by this, I mean free as in the sense of without charge. So I don't actually have to pay something out of my pocket to get something. And increasingly there's pressure even on free without cost. Cost meaning, do I have to put up with advertising when I watch something? And so we see a lot of the change in the ways in which advertising is having to work. Advertising is having to become more effective as content on its own, more relevant to the discussion. In which case it effectively reduces the cost to the users when it's repositioned in that way. But it's a very different environment than marketers have had to work in the past. And fundamentally all of these things are leading, at least in our experience and our belief, a shift away from impression-based models of how we think about the web and how we think about business models to community-based business models. Models where it's not just people having page views, but actually users interacting, users contributing, and the ability to actually monetize and users as they go through their life cycle within the community. And from our perspective, all this means we need a new framework, a framework for how to think about managing performance in a world where content is distributed across the web, users are contributing content right and left. There's huge pricing pressure on the impression-based models, and community is the new word for what this is really all about. One of the things I found when I was thinking about this was, there's often a reference back to site measures and how is the site performing. And I found that as I got into this more, that really probably a more appropriate term is really, instead of site, was community. And how do we actually put performance measures around our communities and understand what they're doing, what they're costing us, and what they're doing for us. So let's just take a quick kind of tour into what this might mean from a perspective of how it's different from both the broadcast and the Web 1.0 models. And here I'm going to focus on revenue, online revenue drivers. If we go back to the broadcast model, it was quite straightforward. We had reach, we had frequency, we had cost per 1,000 impressions, all of which drove to revenue. When we went to the web, we took that model and essentially ported it onto the web with visitors, page views, again CPM and revenue. And I think this kind of model could also be extended out to, if we thought about commerce companies, if we added in click-through rates and conversion rates and price per good, I think we'd end up with a very straightforward kind of linear equation of what drove revenues. And really, as you think about the social web, it's a very different kind of interaction. It's actually one where there's perhaps more recursive process in place, where one action begets another action, which begets a third action, and then starts the whole cycle over again.